for Daddy.
Tim and Penny, I'm so glad that you decided to come and talk with me about everything today. I would like to know a little bit about the stroke, Tim's stroke, and a little bit of a summary. It was quite a few years ago, but just a little bit of a synopsis so we can have some ideas about the journey that Tim's been on.
Tim had a stroke in the year of 2000. Before his stroke, he was in the golf industry. He didn't sell golf carts and golf clubs, but he sold the great big equipment that took care of the greens. So he was a salesman for a company, and he'd been in that industry probably about 16 years. He had changed jobs before his stroke and had a physical 8 weeks before he had the actual stroke, and they gave him a clean bill of health. We lived in Palm Beach County at the time. Tim was traveling home from work one day, and we don't know exactly what happened because he's never been able to tell us, but a truck driver found him laying on the ground at a rest stop, so he called 911, and they of course took him to the closest hospital. He was over 50 miles away from home, so the county that he was in didn't have a stroke protocol for like they do nowadays. The county that we lived in, Palm Beach County, did, but anyway, so he didn't get any of the TPA or any of that stuff. 3 days after he had the stroke and they've got him stabilized, we were informed by the insurance company that he had through work that they would not cover any rehabilitation, and basically we were left to our own. We were there for about a week in the hospital, and then I became Tim's OT, PT, speech pathologist, and his pharmacist. I'm surprised he's still alive. So because of the insurance not paying for anything, I started looking into research. I figured it was free therapy, so we actually came to Gainesville for his first research project, and that was when he, after 2 years, he said his first word, which was banana, and that's all he said for weeks. I was ready to strangle him. Everything was a banana. And then we went to Tampa for summer to do an aphasia program over at the university in Tampa. And we fell in love with Gainesville, and that's how we ended up in the Gainesville area. There was a lot of research going on at the time for stroke survivors, so that's why we ended up moving up here so that he could participate in the research, which he loves doing because he loves working with the young people, and it gets him out of the house.
I was wondering if maybe you could give some tips for the students. We have professionals in all types of different fields in these classes. What kinds of things do you think might be helpful for them to know? What would have been helpful when you were having your acute care, not the rehab, but what would have been helpful for you to have taught them?
Some of the things that Tim and I have learned throughout the last 18 years when it comes to dealing with the health professionals is to realize that aphasia isn't loss of intelligence, it's loss of words. So a lot of times people will approach Tim thinking he doesn't know anything, or he can't remember anything, or that he's not in sound right mind, which is not true. Tim just can't find the words to communicate with the healthcare people and I know when it comes to like physical therapists or occupational therapists, a lot of times they'll tell Tim to do something verbally, and it's better if they show him. He does better with visual signs to follow, because a lot of times we learned in the past that people thought he couldn't do something, and he could, he just didn't understand exactly what they were telling him to do.
Yes. Superior.
You know what you want to say, but you can't get the words out.
Yes,
you know exactly what you want to say.
My wife is Penny.
And that's good, right?
Also, aphasia, there's different degrees of it and there's different types of it. So the experience that we're sharing today is more of the expressive aphasia, meaning Tim knows what people are saying to him. He can read because it's kind of the end channels, and he can understand what's being said to him. But his biggest deficit is when he wants to write, he can't spell anymore, but he can read. So I always
Yes.
explain it to lay people that his in channels didn't get damaged, his out channels did.
Yes.
And with the other type of aphasia, the affluent and there's non-affluent.
My name is Tim Gorey.
Tim and I also experienced when he first had his stroke, the dreaded, if you don't get it back in 6 months, you're not going to get it back, which is devastating to hear, which puts pressure on everybody, like the caregiver and the person that's in trying to rehab from a stroke, because then you get to that 6-month spot and then you get depression sets in and you think, but what we've experienced with Tim's stroke is he's never stopped getting better. He's
Never,
always,
never,
his arm
never,
didn't move at all for the first 2 years. He didn't say his first word for the first 2 years.
Yeah.
He started walking pretty soon after the stroke because I took his wheelchair away from him and put it in the garage. I was his physical therapist.
Yes,
So,
sure.
but the arm and the speech came, you know, a good 2 years. And when you're told 6 months, it's devastating when you hit that 6-month spot.
That's cool.
What can you do with that arm?
This is I told, but there's code.
Fingers? But I see that you don't use it too much. You're pretty left-handed.
This too, but what you do there?
Well, with Tim and his arm, and I've seen it in a lot of people, even though they start regaining some of the use of it, there's a lot of neglect involved because they just forget to use it. So he's definitely doing that. I mean, he can open a door, he shakes people's hands with his
Yeah.
right hand, but other than that, he doesn't do a whole lot with it. And a lot of it is just neglect. He just forgets it's there because he's learned to do life with his left hand.
Baseball,
Tim,
baseball.
stop.
Baseball. Penny, I was wondering if you could talk about post-stroke advocacy and the types of activities that you and Tim have become involved in since his stroke.
I know Tim and I have been very fortunate here in Gainesville that there's a speech pathologist that started a book club for people with aphasia. So we have made some really good friends there. Tim has a couple of guy friends from there
Yeah.
that he goes to lunch a couple times a week, because when you have aphasia, it can become a very lonely place, even for the caregivers, but especially the people that have aphasia, because your friends kind of disappear because they just don't know how to handle it, and then you have to make new friends, which we've done. So the book club has been awesome. We also experienced, when it comes to aftercare, a place in Jacksonville, Florida. It's called Brooks Rehab. We went up there for 9 months from Gainesville, and it's an hour and 45-minute drive. But Tim was going up twice a week, and he was getting 5 hours a day therapy for his speech. You could definitely see a difference in his speech. That's the thing with Tim. If he's in therapy, he improves. But if he's not getting constant therapy, then he backslides. The program up there was really nice because it was all people with expressive aphasia, the kind of aphasia Tim has. He had met some really nice friends up there, and it was good for the caregivers because they were in classes all day, the 5 hours that they were there, so we were left in another room just to conversate, and it ended up being like a caregiver support group.
Yeah.
But we shared a lot together because you go to other support groups that have a mixture of different, or strokes in general, and not everybody has aphasia after they have a stroke. The program up there was unbelievable though, but it was an hour and 45 minutes there, an hour 45 minutes back, and it just got to be too much after a while, so we had to stop going.
But sometimes when we told me this, either she tell me or just one.
You talking about Jacksonville,
Yes,
the speech program up there?
yes, Sarah.
It's called the Aphasia
Yeah,
Center.
Yeah. You look at her beautiful.
We're starting to see more and more of them pop up in the United States. Jacksonville isn't the only one, but it's the only one that's so reasonably priced because they got grants
Yeah.
for people, but it was only costing $10 a day for
No.
5 hours of speech.
Yeah.
And they don't do the traditional ba, pa, ta. It's group settings, and it's kind of like life after. And it makes them have to practice their speech constantly, so they're like slamming their speech center for 5 hours, which is
Yeah.
what they need.
Yeah.
Penny, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the caregiving aspect and how that might have changed and how that might interfere perhaps in your relationship, or along the way has that changed?
When it comes to caregiving, the things that I have learned in the last 18 years is one of the things that I would like a tip that I would like to share with the medical field or people working with stroke survivors is also, this just didn't happen to him, it happened to both of us. And if you work in the acute setting at a hospital, you're going to see the caregivers when they're crazy. We're crazy. We just had our whole world flip upside down. We're not sane. Please give us compassion and grace, and try to understand us, or give us a little slack. We don't stay that way. I've learned that there's stages in caregiving. You start just like with anything else. It changes as time goes by. We're at a place now where we can laugh about his speech. We never know what he's going to say sometimes. We laugh as much as we've cried throughout the years, so it's definitely come a long way in the way that we handle life and the way that we found a new normal. Another tip is our world just got flipped upside down, and all of a sudden we're expected to be OT, PT, and speech pathologist and pharmacist, even if you do get therapy. Tim didn't get any therapy, but people that I've shared rooms with, caregivers, they've all complained also, is the fact that they're expected to do everything. And in a relationship, it's like you share responsibilities of your life together, the chores, the household things and stuff. And when Tim isn't able to do any of that stuff anymore, so that's on my shoulders too now. So I'm doing everything out that he used to be able to do, plus trying to do OT, PT, and speech with him. And many of us caregivers have shared with each other before that there's a time in our lives that we've had to say, do we want to be their wives or their therapists? Because it comes down to that. There's too much fighting. Tim does not want me to be his therapist. He'll work really hard for anybody else, but he doesn't want that person to be me. I'm supposed to be his wife. And I'm not the only one that has felt that way. I learned that I was normal when I would talk to other people about it. So it's just really hard to do everything and then be expected to do all that, and then they wonder why we're so crazy.
So Penny and Tim, do you have anything else that you'd like to share with the students about your stroke experience and the rehab and the continued rehab that you're undergoing?
Yeah, it took us a long time to find a new normal. I think what I ran on the most at the very beginning was hope. And not only had Tim just woke up and had half his body not work anymore, which is devastating to him and me, but to be told that they're not going to do any rehab, so you're trying to fight to get him taken care of properly, plus do everything that he used to do, plus do everything that I used to do, and be all of that too. So it's just really hard for both of us. It was really hard because he felt bad because he couldn't help me do stuff, and that made him sad. And then I'm, burnout. Our son was only 10 when Tim had the stroke, so we still had to finish raising him. There's also, I don't know if a lot of people are aware of it or not, I call it the black hole. If you're over 21 and under 65, there's this big black hole that you fall in to where there's no help. You can't get help from, unless you get Medicaid, which we won't go into all of that, but we weren't eligible for Medicaid because we owned a house. And I mean, it wasn't an extravagant house, it was a 900 square foot home down in South Florida, which that was another something that we had to decide one day, as we couldn't afford to stay in South Florida anymore. It was too expensive once Tim had had his stroke. So we relocated to Gainesville, where the cost of living is better up here. But that was a hard decision to have to make. I know through our journey in the last 18 years, recovering from stroke and sitting in a lot of rooms with a lot of other caregivers of stroke survivors, a lot of us have always wondered why there's not any aftercare or any consideration for people's lives after they've had a stroke. There's no long-term care after strokes. It's kind of basically put on the person that's trying to regain or rehab from the stroke and the caregiver, because who can pay for therapy for the rest of your life? And it's an ongoing thing. It never stops with the therapy. I keep forgetting it.
Gator. I love you.